They say quiet is a luxury you earn. After 25 years in law enforcement, 15 of them spent wading through the worst kind of filth the city could produce, I felt like I'd earned a lifetime of it. I didn't move out here to Pine View Estates for the school district or the community pool. I moved here because when I looked at the crime map, this zip code was a blank space. It was a void, and a void was exactly what I needed. It was raining the night I pulled in. Not a storm, just a relentless, gray drizzle that seemed to soak the sound right out of the air. The neighborhood felt sealed tight. Every lawn was cut to the exact same millimeter height. Every mailbox was a clone of the next. There were no tricycles in driveways, no oil stains on the concrete, no signs of messy, actual human life. It was perfect, and in my line of work, perfect is usually the first sign that something is rotting underneath the floorboards. As I unloaded the truck that first night, my muscles burning from moving boxes filled with a life I was trying to downsize, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It's an instinct you develop on the street, a tingle at the base of your neck that tells you eyes are on you before you ever see them. I scanned the windows of the neighboring houses. Nothing but drawn curtains and dark glass reflecting the street lights. But the feeling persisted. It wasn't the threat of a junkie with a knife in an alleyway. This felt different. It felt colder, more calculated. It felt judgmental. I carried the last box inside the heavy one that I always moved myself. The one containing my service weapons, my vest, and the badge that I had just taken off my chest a few hours earlier. I locked the door behind me, listening to the heavy deadbolt slide home in the silent house. I thought that click meant safety. I thought it meant I could finally exhale. I didn't realize then that I hadn't locked the world out. I had just locked myself into a different kind of cage. I thought I knew what power-hungry tyrants looked like. I was used to them wearing gang colors or expensive suits in interrogation rooms. I wasn't prepared for the kind that wore floral blouses and wielded HOA bylaws like a loaded weapon. I had come here seeking peace, desperate to forget the things I'd seen. But standing there in that empty hallway, listening to the rain drum against the perfectly insulated windows, I realized the silence wasn't peaceful. It was just the deep breath before the scream. Morning broke with a deceptive calm. The silence I craved was there, sunlight filtering through the perfectly spaced oak trees, birds chirping at regulated intervals. I was sitting on the front steps, mug in hand, looking at a cardboard box I hadn't the energy to open yet. For about 15 minutes, I actually believed I'd made the right choice. I breathed in air that didn't smell like diesel fumes and desperation. I was just a guy on a porch, anonymous and unburdened. Then, the silence snapped. It wasn't a noise. It was an arrival. I didn't hear a car door close. I didn't hear footsteps. I just looked up, and there she was at the foot of my driveway, materializing like some suburban specter. She didn't approach like a neighbor coming to borrow sugar. She was surveying a crime scene, and I was the prime suspect. She was short, tightly wound, with hair sprayed into a golden helmet that could probably deflect small arms fire, and cradled in her arm, held with the reverence usually reserved for religious texts, was a clipboard. I've spent decades reading body language. It's survival. You learn to spot the twitch in a junkie's jaw before he pulls a knife, the nervous sweat on a perp before he runs. This woman, she didn't have nerves. She had absolute, unwavering certainty. Her posture was a declaration of war. She stood at the edge of my property line like she was guarding the gates of heaven from a barbarian horde. I remained seated, taking a slow sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch. It's a basic interrogation tactic: make them speak first. It makes them uncomfortable. It didn't work on her. Let me be clear. I wanted to tell her to get off my lawn in language that would make a sailor blush. I wanted to flash the badge still sitting in my kitchen drawer and ask her if she had probable cause for this trespass. But I didn't. I was tired. I just wanted peace. So, I put on the mask. The officer-friendly mask I used for minor traffic stops and terrified old ladies reporting lost cats. Morning, I called out, keeping my voice level, neutral. She didn't return the greeting. She didn't even look at me at first. She took 3 deliberate steps up the driveway, her eyes scanning the environment like a Terminator searching for Sarah Connor. Her pen clicked. Once, twice, she made a sharp check mark on the pink paper. "You must be the new tenant," she finally said. The word tenant dripped with condescension, as if ownership was something I couldn't possibly afford. "Owner," I corrected softly. She ignored me. "I am Brenda Gable, head of the Architectural Review Committee and vice president of the Pineview Homeowners Association. We take great pride in our community standards." It wasn't a welcome. It was a Miranda warning. She finally turned her gaze to me, and her eyes were terrifyingly empty. There was no warmth, only calculation. She was measuring me against a set of invisible criteria and finding me severely wanting. "We have rules here, Mr. Just call me John," I lied. "No last names yet. No handles for her to grab onto." "Rules, John. They exist to maintain property values and the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood." She gestured vaguely with the pen. "You're moving boxes. They are visible from the street. Section 4, Paragraph B states all refuse and moving materials must be shielded from public view immediately upon arrival." I glanced at the 3 neatly stacked boxes by the garage. "I got here 12 hours ago, Brenda. It was dark." Another click of the pen. Another check mark. Ignorance of the bylaws is not an excuse for noncompliance. "And that hose." She pointed a manicured finger at the garden hose I'd used to rinse off my boots. "It is not properly coiled in an approved receptacle. That's a Tier 1 violation." I felt that old, familiar heat rising in my chest, the adrenaline dump you get when someone challenges you. In my old life, people who challenged me usually ended up in cuffs. Here, I was being dressed down by a woman in capris over a garden hose. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh, but I knew laughing would be fatal. Men like me, men used to real power, real consequences, we tend to underestimate people like Brenda. We think they're jokes, but they aren't. They are zealots, and zealots never stop. Then she turned her attention to the street, to my truck. It was a muddy, heavy-duty F-50, a workhorse. Her nose wrinkled as if she smelled raw sewage. "And that vehicle, is it yours?" "It is. It is aggressive," she stated. "Not it's dirty. Or it's big. Aggressive." As if the truck might jump the curb and bite her. "Commercial vehicles are discouraged. They disrupt the visual harmony. You'll need to park it in the garage every night, or face daily fines. It won't fit in the garage." "Brenda." She looked back at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. I saw the pure, unadulterated joy of control in her eyes. "Then perhaps you bought the wrong house. John, we will be monitoring the situation closely. Very closely. We see everything here." She ripped the pink slip off the clipboard with a violent zeep sound. She didn't hand it to me. She walked over and stuck it under the windshield wiper of my truck. "Welcome to Pineview," she said, without looking back, and marched away, her heels clicking like a metronome counting down the seconds until my sanity exploded. I looked at the pink slip fluttering in the breeze. A warning. As I went inside to grab my badge, just to hold it for comfort, I realized I hadn't escaped the war zone. I just traded gang territory for a totalitarian regime run by a woman with a clipboard and a god complex. In my line of work, you learn that every neighborhood has a heartbeat. Some beat with the frantic pulse of a high-crime district, where the air is thick with the scent of cheap beer and bad intentions. Others beat with the slow, steady rhythm of the working class. But Pineview, its heartbeat was a stutter, a nervous, fluttering thing that spoke of people living in constant fear of making a mistake. By day 3, the pink slips under my wiper blades had become a morning ritual. By day 5, I realized I wasn't the only one being hunted. I found my neighbor, Miller, hovering near our shared fence around twilight. He was a man who looked like he'd spent the last decade apologizing for his own existence. He was watering a patch of dirt with an empty can, his eyes darting toward the street every time a car drove by. He looked like a confidential informant waiting to drop a lead in a dark alley. He didn't know I was a sheriff, but he knew I was the new guy who hadn't bowed to the Queen yet. That made me a person of interest. "You need to be careful, John," he whispered. He didn't even look at me. He kept his eyes on his wilting petunias. "The fines. They aren't just about the money. She'll lean your house. She's done it before. She took the Johnson's place right out from under them over a disputed patio color. I leaned against the fence, keeping my profile low. It's a free country, Miller. An HOA doesn't have the power of a high court. There are laws. Miller let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Laws. Brenda is the law here. The board, they're just her puppets. And the police, they don't care about a suburban squabble. But that's not the worst part. He finally looked at me, and I saw a genuine, cold flicker of dread in his eyes. She has the keys. I frowned. I'd spent years handling break-ins, but this sounded different. What keys? The master keys, he hissed, leaning closer. She told us all at the last annual meeting. The HOA bylaws hidden deep in the fine print we all signed apparently give the board the right to emergency access for inspections. She claims she has a master key for every front door deadbolt in the Phase 1 build, and she has a lockout kit for the vehicles. She says it's for fire safety and abandoned property verification. My blood didn't boil. It went cold. That was the professional response the way I felt when I heard a suspect brag about a crime they hadn't committed yet. That's highly illegal, Miller. That's breaking and entering. It's trespassing. It's a litany of felonies. Not if you sign the paper, Miller whispered back, his voice trembling. And even if it is illegal ... Who's going to stop her? She does it at night. People find their trash cans moved, their car glove boxes shuffled. She calls it compliance auditing. She wants you to know she can get to you. She wants you to know there are no locks that can keep her out of your business. I looked past him, up toward the window 3 houses down. The silhouette was still there. Brenda. She wasn't just a bossy neighbor. She was a predator who had spent years grooming her prey. She had convinced an entire neighborhood of grown adults that she held the keys to their lives. It was a psychological operation, a classic display of dominance used by cult leaders and small-time dictators. She had built a kingdom out of fear and beige siding. She's been asking about your truck, Miller continued, his voice barely audible now. She thinks you're a contractor. She hates contractors. She's convinced you're hiding equipment in that black sedan you brought home yesterday. I saw her walking past it this morning, touching the door handles, testing them. I felt a grim smile tug at the corner of my mouth. The black sedan was my unmarked unit. It was currently sitting in my driveway, packed with enough police tech to track a cartel shipment across 3 states. It also had a high-definition, 360-degree Sentry mode camera system that recorded every movement within 20 feet of the vehicle. If she had touched that car, I already had her fingerprints on digital film. Let her test them, I said quietly. Miller looked at me like I was a dead man walking. You don't understand. She never loses. She call the city. She call the cops. She make up a story that'll have you in handcuffs before you can explain yourself. She's done it to others. She calls 911 like she's ordering a pizza. Well, Miller, I said, pushing off the fence and straightening my shoulders. I've spent my whole life dealing with people who think they're above the law. The thing about master keys is that they only work if the person on the other side of the door is afraid. And I haven't been afraid of anything since 1998. I walked back into my house, leaving Miller to his dry watering can. I didn't turn on the lights. I went straight to my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the remote feed from my unmarked unit. There she was. The footage from 10:15 a.m. showed Brenda standing by my driver's side door. She wasn't just looking. She was peering through the tints, her face pressed against the glass, her hand hovering over the handle. She looked possessed. I realized then that the conflict wasn't going to end with a fine or a polite conversation. She was addicted to the power. She was going to try to use that master key on my life. She wanted to see what I was hiding. She wanted to break me. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. For the first time in months, I didn't feel tired. I didn't feel like a retired man looking for peace. I felt like a sheriff. I started a new file on my desktop. I labeled it, Subject Be Gable. The hunt had officially begun. She thought she was the one doing the surveillance, but she had no idea that she just walked into the sights of a man who got paid to put people like her in cages. I wasn't just going to stop her, I was going to dismantle her entire empire, brick by beige brick. The war of attrition had begun. In the military, they call it probing the perimeter. Brenda wasn't just checking for violations anymore, she was hunting for them. Every morning, I'd open my door to find a new yellow slip fluttering in the breeze. One day, it was the height of my fescue apparently. I was a quarter-inch over the community maximum. The next day, it was the reflective index of my front windows. She was grasping at straws, trying to find the one crack in my armor that would make me bend the knee. I didn't engage. I didn't argue. I didn't even clear the stickers off the door. I let them pile up like trophies of her obsession. Every time she stepped onto my property with her measuring tape and her clipboard, my security cameras captured it in 4K. I was building a digital dossier that would make a federal prosecutor weep with joy. I had her for trespassing, stalking, and once I checked the city ordinance's harassment. But Brenda was getting bolder because she mistook my silence for weakness. She started showing up at odd hours. I'd see her shadow pass by my bedroom window at 11 p.m. I'd hear the faint snip-snip of her shears as she corrected a stray branch on my hedge that she deemed offensive. She was no longer just the HOA president. She had become the self-appointed warden of Pineview, and I was her high-profile inmate. My fellow deputies at the station started noticing the change in me. I was spending my lunch breaks reviewing HOA law and tort statutes instead of eating. They'd ask me how the retirement villa was going, and I'd just give them a grim smile. I told them I was working an undercover op. They thought I was joking. They didn't realize that I was applying the same pressure tactics I'd used on cartel lieutenants to a woman who thought a master key made her a god. The neighborhood was watching, too. I'd see curtains twitch when I pulled into my driveway. They were waiting to see when I'd snap. They wanted me to be the one to finally scream at her, to give her the legal high ground she so desperately craved. But I'm a patient man. I've sat in stack-out vans for 48 hours straight waiting for a single hand-to-hand transaction. I knew exactly how this played out. Brenda was spiraling. The more I ignored her, the more extreme her audits became. She was looking for a way into my life, a way to see what lay behind the darkened windows of my house and the tinted glass of my car. She was obsessed with the secrets I was keeping. She didn't realize that the secret wasn't what I was hiding, it was who I was. And the moment she tried to use that master key she bragged about, the trap I'd spent weeks laying was going to snap shut with enough force to break her world in two. I decided it was time to stop playing defense. If Brenda wanted a villain for her suburban drama, I was going to give her one, but not the one she expected. On Tuesday afternoon, I drove my unmarked unit home. It wasn't a standard patrol car with sheriff plastered on the side in reflective vinyl. It was a ghost. A blacked-out interceptor designed to blend into the shadows until it was too late for the person being pursued. To a trained eye, the antennas on the roof and the reinforced steel wheels screamed law enforcement. But to Brenda, to her, it was just a menacing black sedan that didn't fit the color palette of Pine View Estates. I saw her the moment I turned the corner. She was already at her post, standing on the edge of her lawn like a sentry. As I pulled into my driveway, I could practically hear her blood pressure spiking. This car was more than just transportation. It was a mobile fortress. It was equipped with a 360-degree infrared camera system, a digital recorder that tapped into the local precinct's mainframe, and a locking mechanism that could withstand a battering ram. It was the physical embodiment of the authority she thought she held. I stepped out, adjusted my jacket to hide my holster, and didn't even glance her way. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was already reaching for her clipboard, her fingers trembling with the excitement of a fresh violation. To her, this car was an unauthorized commercial-style vehicle. To me, it was the bait. I could feel her eyes burning into the back of my neck as I walked to my front door. I knew her mind was racing. She wasn't just going to find me for this. She was going to try and inspect it. She was going to try and prove that I was hiding something dangerous, something that threatened her perfect little world. I went inside, sat down in the dark, and opened the car's camera feed on my tablet. I watched her on the screen. She was moving closer to the curb, her eyes fixed on the black glass of the interceptor. She looked like she was staring at a challenge she couldn't ignore. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the sun to go down. 2:17 in the morning, the witching hour in suburbia. The silence in the house was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator and the slow, deliberate beat of my own heart. I wasn't asleep. I hadn't slept properly since I laid the trap. I was sitting in the dark, waiting for the inevitable ping of my security system. When the phone finally vibrated against the table, motion detected, driveway zone, it felt less like a surprise and more like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. I picked up the tablet. The feed went live, the infrared sensors turning the pitch-black night into a ghostly gray landscape. And there she was, Brenda, the queen of the HOA, stripped of her clipboard and her daylight authority, skulking in the shadows like a common thief. She was dressed in dark sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, constantly looking over her shoulder. She approached my interceptor not with the arrogance of the day, but with the nervous, jerky energy of someone who knew they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I zoomed in on the feed. My breathing was shallow, controlled. This was the threshold. In her gloved hand, glinting in the infrared light, was the legendary master key, a cheap automotive lockout tool she'd probably bought online. Believing the lie she told the neighborhood, she honestly thought she could just waltz up and pop the lock on a vehicle designed to withstand riots. I watched as she jammed the tool into the keyhole. She twisted. Nothing. The lock didn't even register the attempt. These aren't civilian door mechanisms. They are reinforced, shielded, and hardened against tampering. You don't pick them. You need the transponder key or a hydraulic rescue tool. She tried again, harder, putting her shoulder into it. I could see the panic starting to set in on her pixelated face. Her movements became violent, desperate. She started yanking on the handle, rattling it furiously, as if brute force would make the stay-tissued steel submit to her will. When it didn't budge, she snapped. I saw her lean close to the window, her face contorted in a silent scream of rage directed at the inanimate object that dared to defy her. She was furious. Her absolute power had just crashed against an immovable object. The bait had been swallowed whole. Now, I just had to wait for her to make the mistake that would end it all. I watched the exact moment her brain finally broke. The master key lie had failed, and her absolute authority had just crashed against reality. A rational person, realizing they were committing a felony in their neighbor's driveway at 2 a.m., would have cut their losses and run back into the shadows. But Brenda wasn't rational. She was an addict, and power was her drug. When her own power failed, she did the only thing she had left. She tried to borrow someone else's. She pulled out her phone. I saw the glow of the screen light up her furious, contorted face in the infrared feed. I could see her lips moving fast, spitting venom into the microphone. I didn't need audio to know exactly what she was saying. She was crafting a narrative in real time. She wasn't telling the dispatcher, "I just attempted to break into my neighbor's car and failed." No, she was telling them, "There's a dangerous, suspicious man threatening a lone woman." She was throwing around buzzwords: stolen vehicle, aggressive behavior, imminent threat, the kind of words she knew would guarantee a priority one. Lights and sirens response. It was the ultimate act of suburban warfare, weaponizing 911. She sincerely believed that, because she was Brenda Gable, HOA president, the police were her personal enforcement squad. She thought they would arrive, take her word as gospel without question, and drag me away in cuffs while she watched triumphantly from her porch, clipboard in hand. I stood up slowly in the dark living room, the adrenaline surging but controlled. I walked to the front closet and pulled out the heavy Kevlar vest I hadn't worn since my last day in the city. As I zipped it up, feeling the familiar, reassuring weight settle onto my shoulders, I almost felt a twinge of pity for her. Almost. She was currently screaming demands into the ear of a dispatcher who sits 3 desks down from my office. She thought she was calling the cavalry to save her. She had no idea she was calling my cavalry. The sirens were a dissonant symphony in the quiet suburban night. First one, then two, then 3 patrol cars screaming down the cul-de-sac, painting the manicured lawns in a frantic strobe of red and blue. Brenda stood in the middle of her lawn, lit like a triumphant villain in a cheap opera, absolutely beaming. Her posture screamed, "Justice is here." She had been waiting for this moment, for her absolute vindication. I walked out of my front door, pulling it shut quietly behind me. I didn't rush. I didn't yell. I simply stepped into the chaos she had created. The first 2 deputies were young, fresh out of the academy, all adrenaline and rigid protocol. They were already moving to flank me, their hands hovering near their sidearms, ready to contain the threat Brenda had so eloquently described. But the lead deputy, Officer Miller, a good kid, sharp, been on the force for about 5 years, he paused. His flashlight cut across my face, then dropped, shining briefly on the gold star hadn't even consciously pinned to my shirt, the one I sometimes wore to community events, a force of habit. His eyes widened. The rigid officer presence melted away, replaced by a shock of instant recognition. "Good evening, Sheriff," he said, his voice dropping from a firm command to a respectful, almost hushed greeting. He snapped to attention, pulling the other 2 confused deputies into line beside him. The world seemed to stop. The flashing lights, the wail of the sirens, everything momentarily faded into the background. Brenda, still pointing at me like I was a criminal mastermind, slowly dropped her arm. The triumphant grin on her face withered. Her jaw went slack. The blood drained from her face, leaving it a sickly, ashen gray under the flashing emergency lights. She looked at Officer Miller, then at me, then back at Miller, as if trying to decipher a cruel joke. Her eyes met mine. For the first time, she didn't see a new tenant, or a delinquent homeowner, or a suspicious man. She saw the gold star. She saw the authority. She saw the sheriff. And in that frozen moment, the Queen of Pineview Estates finally realized she hadn't called for backup. She had called her executioner. The silence that followed the reveal was heavier than the sirens. Brenda tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but the lies had finally run dry. When Officer Miller asked her to explain why she was found at 2 a.m. with a lockout kit at the door of a government-issued vehicle, she had no answer. The master key wasn't a myth anymore, it was physical evidence of attempted grand theft and criminal trespassing. I didn't have to say a word. I simply stood there as my deputies did their jobs. They read her rights, the irony of which wasn't lost on me. She had spent years treating this neighborhood like a prison, and now she was the one being processed. As the cuffs clicked shut, the sound echoed off the houses she had terrorized. It was the sound of a regime falling. But the arrest was just the beginning. Once the word spread that the new guy was the sheriff, the dam broke. Neighbors who had been silent for years out of fear started coming forward. My desk was flooded with statements about illegal entries, extorted fines, and psychological harassment. I wasn't just filing a police report. I was spearheading a class action nightmare that would strip Brenda of her position, her reputation, and eventually, her home. She had tried to open my world with a stolen key, but all she did was unlock the door to her own ruin. Months passed, and Pineview transformed. The silence was no longer heavy with fear, but light with peace. Brenda Gable's reign of terror ended not with a bang, but with the quiet, official whimper of legal proceedings and a for sale sign. The HOA was disbanded, restructured with new, democratic leadership, and the arbitrary rules she had imposed vanished like a bad dream. The community started to breathe again. Neighbors chatted on their lawns, kids rode bikes freely, and for the first time, Pineview felt less like a meticulously managed prison and more like a home. Brenda's house, once the symbol of her iron-fisted control, sat empty for weeks. Eventually, a new family moved in, a young couple with 2 noisy kids and a slightly overgrown rose bush. It was perfect. I still live in Pineview. I still drive my unmarked unit to work, though now it's just my car to the new neighbors. The yellow violation slips are distant memory. I often sit on my porch in the evenings, watching the sunset, and sometimes I catch myself smiling. I came here looking for peace, a respite from the constant battle against the ugly side of humanity. I found a different kind of fight, one waged with clipboards and master keys, but a fight nonetheless. And as I watch the kids play, hear the laughter, and feel the genuine calm in the air, I realize that sometimes justice isn't just served in a courtroom. Sometimes it's served right here, on your own front lawn, under the watchful, and now peaceful, eye of a sheriff who finally found his quiet.